Welcome to episode 2 of A Beginner's Guide to Hinduism. In this episode, we will examine questions such as: what is religion? What is its role? Who is a Hindu? And what is Hinduism? Let's start by asking, what is religion? The best answer I have seen to this question comes from the lectures of Swami Vivekananda, a Hindu monk. He says, and I will read out the quote in his own words: "There is one impulse in our minds which says, 'Do.' Behind it rises another voice which says, 'Do not.' There is one set of ideas in our mind which is always struggling to get outside through the channels of the senses. And behind that, although it may be thin and weak, there is an infinitely small voice which says, 'Do not go outside.'" The two beautiful Sanskrit words for these phenomena are privriti, circling forward, and nivriti, circling inward. It is the circling forward which usually governs our actions. Religion begins with this circling inward. End of quote. Religion is the circling inward. In another sense, religion is the description of the relationships between yourself, God, and creation. All the great religions of the world, no matter what they are, describe at a minimum the relationships between God, the creation, and the individual human being. If they do not do so, they will cease to be meaningful. So, when we compare the nature of the world religions, we find that there are two broad highways. The first highway takes the God-centric approach. It is focused on understanding God and the nature of God. The ancient peoples who lived in Middle East Asia took this approach. They asked, who is God and what is the nature of God? From these threads arose Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. The other is the self-centric approach. The Sankhyan rishis in ancient India took this path. They said, all I know for a fact is that I exist. I have no such certainty that God exists. Therefore, I must know myself first. They asked, who am I and what is real? From their influence arose Buddhism and Jainism, the great Indic religions. Now, there are benefits and challenges to either approach. The difficulty of the God-centric approach lies in that it requires faith and a belief that God exists. While it may appear simple on the face of it, it is not easy for many of us to implicitly believe in a being such as God. We look around and we find scant evidence of God in our daily lives. There appears to be plenty of evidence to the contrary at times. We may try to convince ourselves of God's existence. We may chant God's name, but all but the rarest of rare are able to realize this faith and experience God. The rest of us experience a nagging doubt throughout our lives. Even Mother Teresa, one of the greatest devotees of Christ, towards the end of her life, wrote in her diary, I cry out into the darkness, but I don't hear his response. I cry out into the darkness, but I don't hear his response. Even the most devout feel despair. But the benefit of faith is its simplicity and directness, if we can muster it. We do not need to understand the scriptures. It does not require us to meditate, perform mental calisthenics, or understand complicated philosophy. All we need to do is believe, and that simple act, if done with the purest of intentions, can lead us to God. The self-oriented approach has its own challenges. It calls for tremendous discipline. It takes a commitment to learning. It takes reverence for the teacher, intense contemplation of what is taught, and diligent practice of the lessons learned. It is a long and arduous path, but its advantage is that it does not require us to believe anything at the outset. For those of us who are unable to muster the conviction of faith, this offers a path to spiritual progress. The uniqueness of Hinduism lies in how it connects these two highways in religion. It combines the desire to know oneself with the yearning to know the nature of God. By doing so, it provides a canopy for a diverse set of traditions. Many of these traditions are monotheistic at first glance, but they ultimately converge into the non-theistic monism of Vedanta, which can rightly be described as the heart of Hinduism. There is a beautiful Sufi poem which captures the spirit of Hinduism. It goes, "The man who goes in search of God finds himself. The man who goes in search of himself finds God." What is the role of religion? The role of religion is to be a parent. The role of religion is to be a parent, to forgive us when we rebel, to pick us up when we stumble, to comfort us when we grieve, to guide us when we don't know, to shape us and to help us grow in a way that someday it can set us free when we are ready to leave home, so we can find light in our darkest hours, even if it's not there to guide us. Fortunate are the Hindus, for they have such a parent. Who is a Hindu? A Hindu is one who believes in the sanctity of the Veda and accepts the authority of the keepers of the Veda known as Brahmanas. Any attempt to describe a Hindu using a single formula leads to startling contrasts. The same religion which embraces self-mortification and sacrifices also recoils from eating meat or crushing insects. It has more priests, rituals, and icons than ancient Egypt or medieval Rome, and yet outdoes the Quakers in rejecting materialism. These singular contrasts are connected with the ascendancy of the Brahmanas. The Brahmanas of Hinduism are a fascinating social phenomenon without an exact parallel elsewhere. Unlike the Catholic or Muslim clergy, they are not obligated to evangelize or defend a fixed doctrine. They evolved more as an intellectual, hereditary aristocracy who were authorized to direct the thoughts of Hinduism to whatever forms it took. All who admitted this claim and accorded a nominal recognition to the authority of the Veda were accommodated within the spacious tent of Hinduism. No one was excluded as long as they acceded to the authority of the Veda and the Brahmanas. Mahatma Gandhi, a practicing Hindu all his life, wrote, and I quote his own words, "I call myself a Sanatani Hindu because I believe in the Veda, the Upanishad, the Purana, and all that goes by the name of Hindu scriptures, and therefore in avatars and rebirth. Above all, I call myself a Sanatani Hindu so long as the Hindu society in general accepts me as such. In a concrete manner, he is a Hindu who believes in God, immortality of the soul, transmigration, the law of karma and moksha. He is a Hindu who tries to practice truth and ahimsa in daily life and therefore practices cow protection in its widest sense and understands and tries to act according to the law of varnashrama." End of quote. This brings us to the question of what is Hinduism? The simplest and most direct answer is that Hinduism is Sanatana Dharma. Sanatana Dharma. Sanatana means eternal. Dharma is a word that defies exact translation in another language. It can be said to mean the values of life that sustain us. Therefore, Sanatana Dharma or Hinduism is that which is based on life's eternal and universal values. By this meaning alone, it becomes self-evident that Sanatana Dharma is not a religion founded by any single historical figure or a set of figures. It is a set of values that have existed from the beginning of time and applicable to all beings in all of creation. The goal of a Hindu is Atman Jnana or self-realization. The central teaching of the Upanishad is know thyself. This Atman Jnana or self-realization is synonymous with Brahman Jnana or God realization. Indeed, these terms are used interchangeably. The goal of a Hindu is the realization of the self as divine and witnessing the oneness in creation. Other terms used for this are Brahma Anubhava or an intuition of oneness, Brahma Darshana or an insight into oneness, Brahma Samsparsha or a contact with oneness, and Brahma Sakshatkara or a direct experience of oneness. By 600 BC, by the time of the Upanishads, we see several currents emerging in Hinduism, all of which have persisted until today. The first is the ritual. The object of sacrifice in ancient times was partly to please the gods, but more to coax them through specific offers. While this became extraordinarily complicated with the passage of time, it has retained its primitive and almost magical character. The second current is the ascendancy of self-mortification and asceticism as a means of purifying the soul. The Hindu has always possessed the conviction that every man who hungers for salvation must subject himself to discipline. No religious teacher can expect an audience unless he begins by renouncing the world. Later, but well before the arrival of the Christians in India, another idea presents itself in Hinduism, namely bhakti or devotion to a particular deity. While this idea caught the imagination of Hindus, it did not abolish a belief in rituals. A defining current of Hinduism, which emerged along with the Upanishad, is the notion that salvation is attainable by knowledge. A belief that he who knows himself attains God. Nay, he is God. Rituals and renunciation are but preliminaries to this awareness. It is therefore inconceivable to the Hindu that he must care for the things contained in this world, or that he must care for ceremonies and circumstances. Side by side with the irksome rules, complex rituals, and elaborate philosophy, we find unabiding conviction that all these are but objects of the world, mere vanities and fetters to be shaken off by the free in spirit. He who possesses awareness of Brahman stands above all, be they kings, priests, scholars, or monks.
पूर्णस्य पूर्णम्